stood in my own driveway the day she told me she wanted a divorce, and I remember thinking, the grass needs cutting. That's what my brain did. It went somewhere safe. 31 years. That's how long Lorraine and I were married. And in the end, she sat across from me at the kitchen table we'd bought together at a flea market in 1994, the one with the wobbly left leg I'd meant to fix for a decade, and she said she hadn't been happy for a long time. I didn't argue. I didn't throw things. I asked her if she was sure. She said yes. I nodded and went out to the garage and sat on an overturned bucket for about 40 minutes, staring at my workbench. I want to tell you who I am before I tell you what happened, because I think it matters. My name is Leonard. I'm 63 years old. I spent 35 years as a union electrician, commercial work mostly, office buildings, schools, the occasional hospital wing. I drove a pickup truck that had 200,000 miles on it by the time I paid it off. I packed my lunch. I wore the same Carhartt jacket for 12 years until my daughter sewed the lining back in twice and finally told me it was time. We weren't rich, but we weren't struggling either. We had a house in Dayton, Ohio, a 4-bedroom colonial I'd wired myself when the previous owners had it half done and gave up. I'd spent 6 weekends and more money than I want to admit getting it right. The bones were good. It just needed someone patient enough to do the work. Lorraine had been a school administrator. That's where she met Garrett. Garrett was the new district superintendent, came in from Phoenix with a speaker's fee and a TED talk about educational innovation and a watch that cost more than my truck. Lorraine mentioned him 3 times in 1 week at dinner before I started paying attention. The 4th time, she said his name with a different kind of quiet. And that was when I knew. I didn't confront her. I'm not wired that way. Instead, I did what I'd always done when something was bothering me. I started working. I refinished the back deck. I cleaned out the gutters. I replaced the water heater. I stayed busy because being busy meant I didn't have to sit with what I already knew was coming. She asked for the divorce in March. By June, she had moved into an apartment. By August, she was at his house. It took her 47 years to find a man who made her feel like she was living the life she deserved, she told our daughter Melissa. Melissa called me after that conversation. She didn't know what to say, so she just said, "Dad, you okay?" I told her I was fine. I was not fine. The divorce settlement was what you'd expect after 31 years when you're the one who wants it to be over quickly and cleanly. I kept my tools, my truck, and my retirement account. She kept the house. Melissa was 26 by then, grown, living in Columbus with her boyfriend. She was not required to pick sides, but quietly, she picked mine. I only found that out later. What I didn't know was how fast everything moved after I left. I signed the papers in September. By November, Garrett had proposed. By the following April, they were married in a ceremony at a vineyard outside of Columbus. White tents, string lights, a caterer from Cincinnati. I saw photos on Facebook because Melissa's college roommate had attended and didn't realize I'd see them. And our son, Owen, was his best man. Owen was 28 then. He'd always been closer to Lorraine, not in a cold way, just in the way some kids are, where one parent is easier to talk to, more likely to be home, more likely to be home, more likely to be home, more likely to make room. I worked long hours. I was there, but I wasn't always present. I know that. I've sat with that a long time. Owen called me 2 days before the wedding to tell me he was going to be Garrett's best man. He didn't ask me how I felt about it. He said, "I just wanted you to hear it from me." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "He's done a lot for Mum, Dad. He's a good man." And then, quieter, like he was saying something he'd been holding, "He's more her speed. More her speed." I said, "I understand." And I got off the phone, and I went out back and split firewood for an hour, even though it was 60 degrees outside and I didn't need firewood. That sentence, "more her speed," it sat in my chest for a long time. I want to be clear about something. I don't tell you this looking for sympathy. I tell you because you need to understand where I was when I made the decision to leave. Because 6 weeks after that wedding, I put the house, the one I'd bought after the divorce, a small ranch on a half-acre in Miamisburg, on the market. sold my remaining tours to a younger guy at the Union Hall, and flew to Tucson, Arizona. My brother Dale had lived there for 20 years, retired auto worker, dry sense of humor, the kind of man who grows in November without a coat and calls it not that cold. He had a guest room and a standing offer, and in 53 years of brotherly friendship, I had never once taken him up on anything. I called him on a Wednesday. I was there by Friday. I want to tell you what it feels like to walk away from a life you built. It's not dramatic. That's the thing no one tells you. There's no cinematic moment. You just do small things. You cancel the utilities, you forward your mail, you leave a key with the neighbor, and then you get in the truck and you drive to the airport and you feel for the first time in maybe a decade like you can breathe without checking first to make sure it's okay. Tucson was different. The sky was big in a way. Ohio's never is. Dale had a workshop in the back. He made furniture, hobby stuff, small tables and birdhouses, and once a very ambitious rocking chair that we both agreed was structurally optimistic. I started helping him, just to have something to do with my hands. Within 3 months, I had my electrical contractor's license transferred to Arizona. Dale knew a guy who ran a small residential outfit and needed a part-timer. I wasn't looking to build an empire. I just needed a reason to get up in the morning. I'll be honest with you about what those first months were like. They were quiet in a way that was sometimes peaceful and sometimes unbearable. I miss my daughter. I talked to her on the phone twice a week. I missed Ohio in the abstract, the way you miss a version of your life that probably stopped existing years before you left it. I did not miss Lorraine. I had been missing Lorraine for a long time before she was gone. Owen and I didn't talk. Not in a big dramatic way. There was no fight, no final blow-up. We just didn't call, and neither of us forced it. I thought about reaching out 100 times. I composed probably a dozen texts I never sent. I didn't know what to say that wouldn't come out wrong. I lived my life. Dale and I got into a rhythm. Coffee at 6, workshop by 7, job sites by 8. On weekends we drove out to Saguaro National Park sometimes, just to walk. I started losing weight without trying. I slept better than I had in years. Dale's wife, Connie, made Sunday dinners that could stop a conversation. Green chile stew. Tamales at Christmas. I started to feel, slowly, like a person again. Meanwhile, I'd kept an eye on the security camera system I'd installed at Melissa's place in Columbus. She'd had a break-in scare the year before, and I'd wired it myself. She gave me remote access to check it for her when she traveled. I wasn't watching Lorraine. I want to be clear, but Columbus is not a big city in the ways that matter. And Melissa sometimes visited Lorraine, and sometimes, when I checked the exterior camera to see if Melissa's packages were on the porch, I would see Lorraine's car in the driveway next door. She'd moved into the neighborhood of all things, 6 blocks away. And then one day, the car next to hers was a rental. And then it wasn't Lorraine's car. And then Melissa called me and didn't want to talk around it anymore. "Dad," she said, "I think you should know. Things with Garrett aren't good." I asked her what she meant. She told me slowly, in the way she has, where she's choosing every word. Garrett's business ventures. He'd started a consulting company after leaving the school district, had not gone the way he'd pitched them. He'd gone through their savings. He borrowed against the house they'd bought together, the one in Upper Arlington, the nice one, with a new kitchen Lorraine had described to Melissa in enough detail that Melissa had stopped asking questions. He owed money to people. Not dangerous people, but the kind of people who send letters from attorneys and eventually show up as judgments on your credit. The Vineyard Wedding, the Cincinnati caterer, the watch, all of it had been performance. Garrett was very good at performing. Lorraine called me in February. I almost didn't answer. She said she needed to talk. I said okay. She started by asking how I was, which felt like a thing you do before a thing you need. So I waited. And then she said, and I give her some credit for not being coy, "I'm in a difficult situation financially, and I don't know who else to call." I asked her what she needed. She needed help. The house was over-leveraged. Garrett's creditors were circling. She didn't say it outright, but what she meant was, "Help me get out from under this." I sat with that for a moment. and I said, "Lorraine, I'm sorry you're going through this. I genuinely am, but I'm not able to help you the way you're asking." She said, "I don't have anyone else." I said, "That's a hard place to be." She said, "Leonard." I said, "I hope things improve for you. I do." And I ended the call. "I want to tell you I felt nothing. I didn't feel nothing. I didn't feel nothing. I didn't sail shot, not for what we'd lost. I'd already grieved that slowly over years. But sad the way you feel when you see someone you used to love standing in the rubble of choices they made, and you know there's nothing you could have done differently to change it." I didn't hear from Owen for another 6 weeks. When he called, it was a Sunday morning. I was on Dare's back patio drinking coffee and watching a roadrunner do something purposeful near the fence line. I almost let it go to voicemail. I almost didn't. "Dad?" he said. "Hey," I said. He was quiet for a long time, long enough that I checked the phone to make sure the call was still connected. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I've owed you one for a while. I didn't say anything. I let him talk. He told me he'd believed what he'd wanted to believe, that Garrett was a good man because that made it easier to believe his mother had made a reasonable choice, that if Garrett was good, then everything hadn't just blown up for nothing, that if he called Garrett more her speed, then maybe it meant he wasn't betraying me, just describing reality." He said, "But I was wrong about a lot of it, and I was cruel to you in ways I didn't let myself see at the time. I said you were trying to take care of your mother." He said, "I used that as an excuse not to take care of you. I let that land. I didn't rush past it. I told him I wasn't in a place where I could pretend everything was fine. But I told him I was glad he'd called. I told him I'd wanted to call him probably 200 times in the last 2 years and hadn't known how." He laughed a little at that. It was a wet laugh, the kind you do when you're trying not to cry. I know that laugh. He's had it since he was 8 years old. We talked for an hour and 40 minutes. That's the longest we'd talked on the phone since he was a teenager, asking me how to check the oil in his first car. He asked me what Tucson was like. I told him about Dale's workshop, about the green child stew, about the roadrunner. He said, "Are you happy, Dad?" And I thought about it honestly. I thought about the way the mornings feel there, cool and wide and unhurried. I thought about the work, which is modest and useful. I thought about Dale sitting across from me with his terrible coffee and his dry jokes. I thought about Melissa's calls twice a week. I thought about being 63 and lighter than I've been in a long time, in ways that have nothing to do with weight. I said, "Yeah, I think I am. There's something I want to say about men like Garrett, and about what I've come to understand since all of this happened. Not bitterness. I'm past bitterness, or at least I'm working at it, but something true. Performance is exhausting. For the person doing it, and eventually for everyone around them. Garrett could perform wealth and vision and confidence. What he couldn't do was maintain a foundation, financially, emotionally, in any of the ways that actually sustain a life over time. And Doreen, who spent 31 years with a man who got up every day and did unglamorous work and paid the bills and fixed what broke. She mistook steadiness for limitation. That's not a judgment. That's just what happened. I wasn't glamorous. I didn't have TED Talks or vineyard weddings. I had a Carhartt jacket and a wobble in a flea market table I never got around to fixing. I packed my lunch. I came home tired. But when the lights go out in a building, not metaphorically, actually, you want someone who knows where the panel is. You want someone who knows where the panel is. You want someone patient, someone who's going to stay until the problem's solved. That's what I did my whole life. That was who I was. And it turned out, in the end, that was worth something. Melissa came to Tucson in the spring. She'd never been, and she spent 4 days trying every salsa Dale could source and asking questions about the plants. She called it the best long weekend of her life, which I know is something you say. But she said it 3 times, unprompted, so maybe she meant it. On the last night, we sat out back after dinner. Dale and Connie had gone inside. The sky over the mountains was doing something pink and impossible. Melissa was quiet for a bit, and then she said, "I'm glad you left, Dad. I mean that. I asked her what she meant. She said, I think if you'd stayed in Dayton, stayed close to all of it, you would have just gotten smaller, and you were already getting small. I didn't have an answer for that. I just sat with it. Because she was right. I had been getting small, quietly, slowly, in the way that happens to people who keep accommodating and adjusting until there's less and less of them taking up space. Owen came to visit 2 months after that. Just him, a long weekend. Flights he'd paid for himself. He helped me in the workshop. He was not naturally handy, but he was patient, which matters more. We built a small side table together. It took most of Saturday and came out a little lopsided, but it was solid. When he left, he said he'd be back. I believed him. Here is what I know. Standing on the other side of all of it, stability isn't glamour. A man who shows up, who fixes things, who packs his lunch and keeps his word, that man is not less than. He is not slow, he is not behind. He is not the wrong speed for anything. And when the performance ends, and it always ends, what's left is either a foundation or rubble. I spent 31 years building a foundation. That foundation didn't stop existing just because she left it. It came with me. The table in Dale's workshop, the one Owen and I built together, I put a small level on it after we finished. I slid it across the surface. The bubble sat right in the middle. Dead level. That's enough for me. I've been thinking about what it actually means to pay a price for the way you live. Not in any cosmic sense. I'm not talking about fate or the universe evening some score. I'm talking about something simpler and more honest than that. The plain fact that choices have weight, and weight accumulates, and eventually it lands somewhere. Garrett made choices. They looked impressive from the outside. The watch, the title, the vineyard wedding with the string lights, and the Cincinnati caterer. He built a life that photographed beautifully. What he didn't build was anything underneath it. No margin, no honesty, no foundation that could hold when the performance got expensive. And it always gets expensive, eventually. You can borrow against a house once. You can charm a room full of people for a while. But you cannot outrun math, and you cannot sustain a life built on what you want people to think you are. That's not judgment. That's just cause and effect, playing out the way it always does. Lorraine made choices too. I don't say that bitterly. I said what I had to say to her when she called, and I meant it. I was sorry she was in pain. I am still sorry about that. In the distant way, you can be sorry for someone you've already grieved. But she chose speed over steadiness, and she confused the two things for a long time, and that confusion cost her. And I made choices. I worked too much. I was present in the house and absent in the room. I let years go by without asking the right questions. Those choices cost me too. They cost me a marriage, and for a while, a son. I own that. I've sat with it long enough to know it's true. What I've come to understand is that intelligence isn't only about being right. It's about being honest enough to look at what you actually built and ask whether it's level. Owen called me and told me the truth about himself, that he'd used his mother's situation as a reason not to see mine. That took more intelligence than anything he could have said in his own defense. It took him looking squarely at something uncomfortable and not looking away. That's the thing worth respecting. Not the grand gesture, the honest one. And resilience. I used to think resilience meant toughening up, powering through, keeping your face neutral while you split firewood you don't need. But what it actually meant, for me, was getting on a plane to Tucson and admitting that staying in Ohio wasn't surviving. It was just shrinking slowly in a place that used to fit. Resilience was letting Dale make bad coffee and Connie make good stew, and letting that be enough for a while, until I was enough again. The table Owen and I built in that workshop is still there. A little lopsided, a little lopsided, a little imperfect. But the level said what it said. I'll take it.